Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today in our blended learning community of practice. Today, I want to talk to you about an advanced AI technique called prompting patterns. I use prompting patterns to improve my results using AI large language models on a fairly regular basis. And today, I want to talk to you about my 10 favorites. Now, prompt patterns matter because they help users get consistent, high-quality results from language models. Instead of guessing what to type, patterns give structure to your prompts, like templates that guide the model towards specific kind of answers. Whether you're analyzing data, writing presentations, or brainstorming ideas, prompt patterns make the process more efficient, more accurate, and easier to iterate on. Without prompt patterns, you engage the entire training data of the large language model, and while results may be satisfactory, they may not be as ideal, and certainly not as effectively iterated on. Prompt patterns help channel the model's creative potential in enhanced ways. They help harness the same creative aspects that generate hallucinations. It's important that I note hallucinations are in fact a feature and not a bug. This feature allows the language model to think creatively and explore new possibilities, resulting in new and sometimes unexpected ideas. When used intentionally through the right patterns, that creativity becomes a powerful tool for problem solving, innovation, and thinking outside the box. For today's session, I would like us to think of AI not as artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence. Now let's take a look at our first pattern. One of the most intuitive and most powerful prompt patterns you can learn is the persona pattern. The persona pattern works on a simple but transformational idea. You don't need to know what the perfect output should look like, you just need to know who to ask in the real world. If you had a tricky accounting problem, you talk to an accountant. If you needed to investigate a data breach, you talk to a cybersecurity analyst. This pattern allows us to simulate that expertise. Here's a simple formula. Act as persona, provide output that persona would provide. What's critical here is we're not asking the model to mimic formatting or structure, we're leveraging its pattern matching abilities to simulate thinking like someone else. That unlocks creativity, critical thinking, and a whole range of problem-solving strategies. There's more to this than creativity. This pattern can be used tactically too. Let's say you need input from multiple stakeholders, finance, legal, HR. You can generate parallel analysis for the same situation, each from a different persona. Let me show you what this looks like. Over here you can see I've asked ChatGPT specifically to act as a skeptical computer scientist, analyzing this claim, AI will replace all data analysts in 5 years. And you can see its response, very thought out, very analytical, much like you would expect from a computer scientist. As a comparison, I've asked it also to act as a skeptical 9-year-old and analyze it saying AI is going to take over the world. And as you can see, it responds much more like a 9-year-old would. ChatGPT and other large language models are able to respond as though it were an expert with the mindset, adding knowledge, formatting, and even tone that matches the persona. The key takeaway here is the persona pattern lets you simulate expertise, perspective, tone, emotional nuance, all with a single sentence. Whether you're analyzing a complex business decision or simplifying a concept for training, this pattern is an incredibly high leverage tool. Sometimes it's not about who the model pretends to be, it's about who it's talking to. So let's talk about the audience persona pattern. It flips the perspective. Instead of saying act as a, you say explain this to me assuming I am a certain person. It tells the language model you're writing for a specific kind of person, so tailor your output accordingly. This pattern is subtle but powerful. It helps you make sure the model's output isn't just relevant, but appropriate for the audience who we're working with. For example, over here, I've asked ChatGPT to explain how large language models work, assuming I'm a second grader who gets bored easily. And it does so pretty well. Imagine a really, really big robot brain that has read a bazillion books, stories, websites, and even jokes, so on. For contrast, I've also asked it to explain it as if he were talking to Christopher Columbus. And you can see here, good Sir Columbus, permit me to share with thee knowledge of the most wonderful invention, not of sails or stars, but of words and wisdom, and so on. Now, why do this? Because it instantly calibrates the complexity, format, and even storytelling tone without you having to specify it all up front. You'll see the explanation transform based on whether the audience is a child, a mathematician, or a historical figure. This lets you reframe dense content for specific stakeholders, maybe a project manager, a client, or even a young learner. The key takeaway here is the audience persona pattern makes the model tailor its output to match the background, expectations, and attention span of the audience. Now let's talk about the question refinement pattern. Let's face it, asking the right question is often the hardest part of prompting. This is especially true when working with large language models because the quality of the output is directly tied to the quality of your input. That's where question refinement comes in. This pattern takes advantage of the large language model's ability to recognize better versions of your question, often with more clarity, structure, or helpful context than you might have thought to include, ultimately making it more likely to elicit a useful response. Here's the simple prompt structure. Whenever I ask a question, suggest a better version and ask if I'd like to use it instead. That's it. Now you're no longer working alone. You're collaborating with the model to improve your own thinking. Let me give you an example. Let's say you type in, whenever I ask a question, suggest a better one and ask if I'd like to use it, as I've done over here. Then I went ahead and asked it, should I learn Python or R? The large language model responds, here's your original question, should I learn Python or R? Here's a more refined version that could help get a more tailored answer. And sure enough, it's a pretty solid question. It asks me if I'd like to use it, say yeah, sure, and it provides me a much better response than I probably could have gotten than with my original prompt. It's not just about polish. It's also about surfacing what you didn't include. When the model rewrites your question, it may highlight missing variables. These aren't just improvements, they're clues that help you recognize the underlying assumptions you didn't say out loud. For analysts and designers, that reflective moment is extremely valuable. It's where we can clarify our criteria, reframe the problem, and move toward better decisions. It will help uncover critical insights, key ideas, and translate vague prompts into actionable analysis. The key takeaway here is that the question refinement pattern is like having a collaborative thought partner. It helps you ask sharper questions, uncover blind spots, and generate better answers, making your input stronger from the start. Asking the right question can save you hours of time and prevent unclear results. Now let's review the cognitive verifier pattern. This pattern is all about structured thinking. It taps into the large language model's ability to reason more effectively by breaking problems into smaller, more manageable parts. Why does this matter? Because complex decisions, whether you're investigating a training gap, modeling customer behavior, or comparing policy options, rarely have a single clear input and output. They involve multiple factors, dependencies, and unknowns. So here's the structure of the pattern. When asked a question, first generate sub-questions that would help answer it. Then answer each sub-question, and then combine those answers into a final response. Now what we're doing is teaching the model to reason out loud. We're asking it to slow down, think step by step, and build a more coherent result. Let me show you how it works. I've put it into the cognitive verifier pattern here, and then I've asked it, how many mosquitoes probably live in my front yard? Well, that's a pretty vague question, but it does. It asks a number of different sub-questions. How big is my yard? Is my yard shaded? Standing water? Do I live in a region with high mosquito activity? And what time of year is it where I am? Now, these sub-questions are what an expert entomologist might ask, and they show that the model is reasoning through the problem, not just throwing out a guess. This pattern gives you two things at once: a better, more justifiable answer, and a transparent process that lets you evaluate the assumptions as you go. This is especially valuable when dealing with data synthesis, stakeholder recommendations, or instructional decisions. You want not just an answer, but a process. The key takeaway here is that the cognitive verifier pattern helps model critical thinking. It breaks complex tasks into smaller parts, creates context-rich answers, and lets you evaluate the chain of thought behind each result. Now let's fill in the blanks with the recipe pattern. Think about this. You know your goal, and you might even know a few of the steps to get there, but you're not sure how to connect the dots. That's where the recipe pattern shines. This pattern helps you take a partial process you've started, fill in the missing steps with support from the large language model, and output a complete, coherent workflow or plan. It's a bit like saying, here's what I know, help me finish it. An example, I've asked ChatGPT to help me plan a road trip. I've got some gaps in my plan though. I know I want to start in Los Angeles, and I know I want to end in New York, but I don't know what to do in the middle there. So I've asked it to help me plan my road trip. I've used ellipses to indicate missing stops. And you can see it has. It's filled in the appropriate stops, intelligently selecting cities like Las Vegas, Denver, Chicago, and Pittsburgh, depending on the route logic it's learned from its training. Some applications beyond travel would be data analysts might have some variables for a regression model. Ask it to suggest other important ones by providing half the data cleaning process and let it propose the remaining steps. Instructional designers can outline a course with known modules and ask the model to suggest transitions, fill in assessments, and recommend learning activities that match each topic. You start with what you know, and you let the model complete the playbook. Our key takeaways here are that the recipe pattern will give you a way to start with partial knowledge and end up with a complete useful result. It's not just about finishing your thought, it's about collaborating design with AI. Now let's talk about the flipped interaction pattern, one of my favorites. Most of our interactions with ChatGPT involve us asking the questions and the model answering. But sometimes we need the reverse. We might not know what to ask or where to begin, so we might be trying to solve a problem, design a course, or even clarify a goal, but we don't know the right prompts to use to get us there. That's where the flipped interaction comes in. This pattern flips the script. The language model becomes the interviewer, and you become the one answering the questions. Here's the basic prompt structure. Ask me questions about a topic until you have enough information to output the goal. When you have enough information, show me the result. Now ask me the first question. Simple enough and incredibly effective. Over here, I've tried an example. I've asked ChatGPT to create some fitness goals for me. I know I want to increase my strength, so ask me enough until you have enough to create the routine, basically. And here you can start to see. It begins to ask me my questions, and I answer them quite easily, one by one. As we get down to the bottom, you can see it's finally got enough information, and it provides me an entire full week strength training routine with some notes. No guesswork, no need to know all the inputs, just a natural back and forth conversation. When used correctly, the flipped interaction feels more like a collaboration and less like a transaction. Some real-world applications for instructional designers might be, ask me questions until you have enough info to design a lesson plan for data literacy. Data analysts might say, ask me questions until you can recommend a model for this data set. Writers, they might say, ask me questions about our audience and goals until you can write a persuasive email. Why this works. The large language models are trained on structured problem-solving patterns, which often include the kinds of questions people ask before making decisions. This means it doesn't just guess at random. It draws on examples, from coaching, planning, diagnostics, investigations, consultations, and it uses those patterns to guide you toward clarity. Here's a helpful tip. End with the ask me the first question. This part is actually crucial. If you don't include that sentence, the model might generate all the questions at once or jump straight to the answer without engaging in the conversation. This pattern shines when it's one question at a time. It feels more human, it keeps you focused, and it gives you the opportunity to reflect as you build toward your solution. Here's how you can level it up. Use the flipped interaction plus the persona pattern and say something like, act as a data analyst, ask me questions about a messy spreadsheet until you can suggest how to clean it. Or use the flipped interaction with the recipe pattern. I know some steps of this solution, but not all of them. Ask me questions until you can complete the process. It's a pattern that adapts beautifully and becomes more powerful when used with other patterns. The key takeaway here, though, if you don't know where to start, let the model start. Flipped interaction gives you a guided conversation, one smart question at a time. It turns the model into an interviewer, a coach, a consultant, or just a brainstorming partner. Now let's take a look at the gameplay pattern. One of the most unexpected delights of working with large language models is how well they can simulate games. Now, when I say games, I don't just mean entertainment. I'm talking about structured, rule-based interactions that challenge us to think critically, solve problems, and sharpen our skills. The gameplay pattern is especially useful for learning new skills or deepening our mastery of things like prompt engineering, coding, or conceptual reasoning. Here's the idea. You ask the large language model to be the game master. It will create rules, assign roles, and generate content for a game on any topic you choose. Why use this? Well, because we retain more information when we're engaged, and we stay engaged when something feels fun, challenging, and interactive. Let me show you a practical use case. Let's say I want to practice writing better prompts. I might say, we're going to play a game involving prompt engineering. You'll give me a task that can be solved with a prompt. I'll write a prompt to solve a task, and you'll run that prompt. Show me the output, and tell me how well I did. Now, ask me the first task. It says, nice, I love this game. Let's dive in, and it provides me a prompt task. Write a prompt that generates 5 original business ideas for a side hustle that can be started with less than $500, location independent, suitable for someone with basic writing and research skills. My turn. I generate a prompt for it. It says perfectly structured prompt. Let's run it and see how it goes. It runs the output for me, shows me the 5 business options, and then it evaluates the prompt. It gives me a rating of a 10 out of 10. It says my prompt was clear on constraints, specific in structure, and explicit in exclusions. It says the output met every requirement, unique, creative, and detailed. Seriously well done. Yeah. Now it wants to know if I'm ready for task 2. This back and forth gives immediate feedback. It lets me iterate and importantly removes the mental burden of coming up with challenges and ideas. Here's the magic. Because the model has been trained on hundreds of types of games, quizzes, logic puzzles, and simulations, it can improvise content endlessly, all within the rules you define. Obviously, we're not limited to just improving our own skills. You can use gameplay to teach others. Imagine an onboarding game for new analysts. ChatGPT act as a training coach for new data hires. Create a game to teach best practices for cleaning and visualizing messy data sets, for example. Or for policy training. Act as a compliance coach. Create a decision game that teaches users when to escalate a legal concern. The possibilities aren't just flexible, they're limitless. You can gamify almost anything. And when you do, you unlock one of the most effective and enjoyable ways to use large language models. The key takeaways here are gameplay patterns transform prompting into practice. It motivates us to improve and gives us built-in feedback. Whether you're building a skill, exploring ideas, or training others, the gameplay pattern helps you move from passive prompting to active learning. Now let's talk about one of the other really valuable patterns here, the alternative approach pattern. Sometimes the value of a tool isn't just in solving the problem. It's in showing you all the different ways the problem could be solved. That is the power of the alternative approach pattern. Whether you're designing a training course, developing an Excel dashboard, or writing a data summary, there are almost always multiple valid ways to get to the finish line. This pattern lets the model generate alternative strategies for completing a task, and then helps you evaluate and select the best one. Think of it as structured brainstorming with a really well-read teammate. Here's the basic formula. From now on, if there are alternative ways to accomplish the task, list the best alternative approach, compare and contrast them, and then ask me which ones I'd like to use. In this case, I asked it to write a prompt to extract key stakeholder questions from a chain of emails. Here, it provides a couple of really quality approaches and then a comparison table. Approach 1 is clean and structured, and approach 2 offers more context and a human tone. So now we're not just generating content, we're selecting from well-defined options with trade-offs clearly defined. The pattern is especially valuable when evaluating training delivery formats, selecting prompt engineering strategies, exploring reporting methods, comparing data visualizations, assessing learning assessments, and so on. Here's a pro tip. Let it inspire unexpected solutions. Sometimes the best use of this pattern is not for answers, but for possibilities. In summary, the alternative approach pattern lets you brainstorm options, discover blind spots, evaluate trade-offs, and make smarter choices. It's a perfect pattern for any task that has more than one viable solution. Now let's talk about another really useful pattern, the fact checklist pattern. Trust but verify with this pattern. It sounded right, but was it? I think we've all experienced a large language model response that feels authoritative, clear, and useful, but we're left wondering if we can actually trust it. This pattern helps you verify what you're seeing before you act on it. The fact checklist pattern prompts the model to output a structured list of verifiable facts alongside its main response. These are explicit factual claims that, if incorrect, would undermine the validity of the output. This pattern helps you surface the underlying assumptions or factual claims in an output, right at the time they're generated. It gives you a checklist of the facts the model relied on to generate its response, so you can quickly spot what to verify. This is especially useful in analytic summaries, report generation, content development, instructional design, research planning, and so on. Instead of sifting through paragraphs of assumptions or inaccuracies, you get a concise checklist of key claims to verify. Here's the base pattern. Whenever you output text, generate a set of facts that are contained in the output. The set of facts should be inserted at the end of the output. These should be fundamental claims that, if incorrect, would undermine the text above. You can adapt this to ask for 3 to 5 most important facts or separate high confidence versus needs review categories. In this case, it's giving me an example output about the moon landing and some fundamental facts. But I went ahead and asked it to write a 1-paragraph explanation of why chunking is effective in instructional design, and then list the key facts from your explanation that I should verify. And here you can see it talks about why chunking is effective, and then it provides the set of facts that I need to verify. An important note here is that the pattern doesn't guarantee the model's original content is correct, but it helps you surface the assumptions. It helps you audit what the model is doing and create a structured process for quality control. These are essential if you're using the outputs to teach, inform, or make decisions, because now you know what to fact check. And just as importantly, this checklist encourages reflection. Do these claims match your standards or peer-reviewed sources? Now, why does this matter? This pattern isn't just about preventing mistakes, it builds a habit of critical thinking. Even if the model is 90% right, the 10% it gets wrong could cost time, credibility, or impact. By prompting the model to surface its own assumptions, you can focus your attention on what matters most. Now, our 10th and also one of my most used patterns is the ask for input pattern. Sometimes you want a model to listen before it acts. You want to set the rules and then have it pause and wait for you to decide what comes next. That is exactly what the ask for input pattern enables. Imagine you're setting up a structured interaction, like a flipped interaction where the model asks you questions, or a brainstorming session with specific guidelines, or a process where you want to apply certain rules but only after some input. But instead of waiting for you, the model starts generating ideas and responses or summaries way too early. This is where ask for input comes in. It gives you an intentional pause. After describing the rules, you close your prompt with a short phrase like, "Now ask me for the first input," or "Ask me the first question." That last sentence is like a brake lever, and it works surprisingly well. Here is an example. I've asked ChatGPT, whenever I ask you to write a prompt, list the task, generate 2 to 3 alternative prompt styles for solving it, and show a sample for each. Now the key is I say, "Now ask me for the first task." ChatGPT responds, and it pauses there. So perfect. Now I'm in control. Without the ask me line at the end, it might have just guessed a task and run off in the wrong direction. So in instructional design or data workflows or professional writing, controlling the model really matters. We don't always want the model to just run. We want it to walk with us. The ask for input pattern is a small but powerful way to put the human back in the driver's seat and guide the model step by step. Now for the real pro tip. Combining patterns for sophisticated prompts. Patterns are powerful alone, but transformative together. Just as a single Lego piece can't build a castle, a single prompt pattern often isn't enough to fully solve a complex problem. This is where pattern composition, or combining multiple prompt patterns, comes into play. Why combine prompt patterns? Because real-world tasks are rarely one-dimensional. You may need to brainstorm options using the alternative approach pattern, evaluate outputs using the fact check pattern, adapt it for your audience using the audience persona pattern, and ask for user input along the way using the ask for input pattern. Now, you don't want to manually handle all those moving parts in separate prompts. You want one prompt to do the job of many. As a practical example, I've asked ChatGPT over here to assume the audience is a human resource manager with limited technical background. When asked to create onboarding modules for new employees, generate at least 3 different approaches for doing so. After listing the approaches, ask me if I'd like to continue developing any one of them. It says, sure, here they are. It lists approach 1, approach 2, approach 3, and then it pauses. And it says, would you like to continue developing one of these approaches or explore hybrid solutions that combine the best of each? Now, with this one prompt, I've shaped the output for myself, enforcing a consistent, readable format, brainstorming alternatives, and creating an interactive loop. Now, if you're not sure what to combine, try this. Take a pattern you like, say the flipped interaction, and say, what could I pair this with to make it more effective? Could you add a persona to control the tone? Could you add a recipe to guide it toward an end result? Could you use ask for input to make it conversational? Now here's my suggestion. Always, when combining, place the ask for input clause at the end. It works best as a brake that stops the model from auto-generating too much. Some final thoughts. Prompt patterns are a reusable strategy that help you get better, more reliable, and more tailored outputs from ChatGPT and other large language models. Patterns like persona, question refinement, flipped interaction, fact checklist, and others can dramatically increase the clarity and effectiveness of your work. These patterns aren't just techniques. They are a precise way of thinking about interacting with AI systems. By combining patterns, you can design workflows that save time, surface insights, and increase confidence in your results. You don't need to be a prompt wizard to get started, you just need to be curious. Try some of the patterns we've discussed. Combine a few. Scroll through the results, and most importantly, Treat the model not as a magic answer box, but as a skilled assistant who becomes far more capable when you give it structure and purpose. The future of work with AI is not just about automation, it's about collaboration. Prompt patterns are how you lead the collaboration with intention and clarity. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you walk away with this not just with inspiration, but with tools you can start using today to augment your own intelligence.